100 years ago, a young Brazilian explorer ventured into the mountains of coastal Rio de Janeiro in search of undiscovered aroids. He hunted for large, leafy foliage in a time when roses and azaleas dominated the gardens of Brazil. This is the story about the inventor of the modern tropical garden, Roberto Burle Marx. The name Burle Marx is given to more than 50 different plants, such as BMF or Burle Marx flame as we commonly know it, or of course the philodendron Burle Marxii. Rumor has it he also shared a last name with Karl Marx, a distant relative. Calatheas, begonias, anthuriums, heliconias, and more bear his name. He helped discover more than 100 different plants. But Burle Marx is most famous for his landscape architecture that broke the conventions of straight lines of the previous generations and brought back a spunk to public spaces such as the Copacabana Promenade of Rio. He went on to complete over 3,000 landscape projects in 20 different countries. But we're here to talk about his contributions to the tropical plant world because he also became known for bringing plants from his local mountains and integrating them into landscape at a time when this was seen as classless. He even recounts receiving his first aroid as a gift from his aunt.
Aos 7 anos, eu já tinha uma coleção de plantas. Minha tia me deu uma alocasia cúprea.
In 1928, he traveled to Berlin to visit the greenhouses of Engler, the father of the plant classification system. It was in cold European weather that Burle Marx fell in love with the lush tropical foliage of his home, as well as the other large foliage Engler had imported from across the tropics. When he returned to Brazil, he embraced the plants of his forests. In an era where it was common to plant your local flora out of sight in your backyard alongside your fruit trees and common plants, Marx did the unthinkable and planted the local flora of Brazil in his landscape gardens. He avoided choices of roses, begonias, caladiums, and azaleas, which were the commonly accepted plants for front yards. His desire for broadleaf plants sent him exploring into the tropical rainforests of eastern Brazil. Though the coastal flora was in equal reach, the lush foliage of the jungle attracted Burle Marx. And not only did he embrace the local plants of Brazil, but all tropical plants from across the world. Even though dozens of plants bear his name, there are likely some unaccounted for discoveries, such as the Spiritus Sancti. He grew up 100 kilometers south of the Brazilian state of Espírito Santo, where the Spiritus Sancti was described in 1982. However, the year before, in 1981, an undescribed philodendron species that looks identical to the Spiritus Sancti was published in Aroidiana, a plant noted to have been taken from the gardens of Burle Marx. The tight internodal spacing and long, sharp leaves of this mature philodendron makes it almost certain that Burle Marx had the Spiritus Sancti in his personal collection for decades before it was described as a specific species. He frequently made trips and expeditions to the local states around him in Rio, Sao Paulo, and Espírito Santo. This wide sinus philodendron was published in the same volume that Burle Marx flame was depicted in. There was a variety of large-leafed aroids photographed in 1981 at his property in Brazil. These species were collected in what is now considered Sitio Roberto Burle Marx, a massive compound where Burle Marx could be found playing his piano or tending to his garden. At one point in the 20th century, it housed the largest living collection of plants in the world, containing over 3,500 species. Like many of us, Burle Marx immersed himself in the natural world as a way to cope with life. But sometimes you need a little more help, like online therapy from BetterHelp, the sponsor of today's video. Recently, I signed up for BetterHelp as a way to help me cope with the stresses of life. Being a parent, a husband, and a business owner is super stressful, and it gets pretty overwhelming. And honestly, I've been procrastinating going to therapy for probably decades, and it's time that I go. I think we all have our struggles to work through, and it just helps to talk with someone. And thanks to BetterHelp, this is actually my first time in therapy, and I'm finding it really insightful to talk with someone, to have them distill my problems down and kind of give me solutions to work on. And if there's no solution, then I can just openly talk to someone, which feels good. As my wife and I joke about, men do just about everything but go to therapy. You can choose to message your therapist, talk on the phone, do video chats, or any way that works with you. To get started, you just answer a quick few questions and then they match you with a therapist. Most matching gets done within 48 hours. I actually got matched the same evening that I took the questionnaire. BETTERHELP.com/prettyandgreen to get 10% off your first month. Conservation was not a priority in the early 1900s because species extinction wasn't yet a problem in Brazil. But Burle Marx's appreciation of the native plants of Brazil led to conservation efforts in the second half of the 20th century. He crusaded against deforestation of Amazonica and warned of the disappearance of Mata Atlântica, the lush vegetation on Brazil's eastern coast. Protection of the Brazilian rainforest is in part due to the work of Burle Marx. Though Marx collected thousands of species, he did not fancy himself a botanist. He was considered a plant man. Plants were simply another material in his approach to designing outdoor spaces. He was a Renaissance man. His landscapes were designed not only to look inviting up close, but they were an art form from above. He was recognized for his ability to design at different scales and for different points of view. He was a painter, often portraying his favorite plants, and even a plastic artist. He sang and played piano, and from all accounts, he was highly talented. He even made jewelry. He was described as an abundantly joyous man. Those around him found his happiness to be contagious. He ventured on many expeditions in search of new foliage. He specifically would hunt for plants growing off of rock surfaces such as philodendrons, anthuriums, orchids, begonias, and bromeliads. They would travel in large groups. Each participant was skilled in transplanting, pruning, packaging, and transporting the plants so they would arrive safely back to Rio. He would go on quests in search of collecting a singular new species to distant lands. Tips would come from botanists or even laymen about where to find new species. One such time, he went searching for a huge leafed anthurium on an island south of Sao Paulo. The plant was not yet protected by environmental law, but the sea was far too rough and their journey was unsuccessful. I would have loved to see what this plant looked like. Roberto was known always to be in such a great mood, singing and joking. He would joke around with local inhabitants upon arrival and say, "We're a circus, we're looking for a place to set up our tent." His colleague Gilles Clement summarized him warmly. What really stands out is his capacity to live. He has a kind of happiness in life. He is something more than joyful. What we can learn from Burle Marx is how he viewed a garden as separate elements that are completely dependent on one another and indivisible, separate ingredients that need to be mixed together at the right ratio, but all depend on each other. He collaborated with many architects of the era. One such time was with Luis Filho to introduce a Ficus pertusa into a garden which they had collected at a railroad station. The fig tree they planted took quickly to the warmth and humidity of the Brazilian climate. Once they accomplished this, the two friends were so thrilled with their feat, they missed their train home, carrying aboard all of their personal luggage. Roberto Burle Marx lived a privileged life, which he made the best of. To be educated in Germany as a native to Brazil during the World Wars meant he was a lucky man, but he took full advantage and showed how life was meant to be lived, living till his mid-80s until his passing in 1994. Cheers to you, Roberto Burle Marx, a life well lived by a lover of nature and earth. A final quote from Roberto Burle Marx. "These mysteries, these forces of nature are my gods. When I no longer have the curiosity to pursue them, I will surely die." If you enjoyed this type of video, please click the like button down below and consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. We really appreciate every one of you. Thanks for watching.